been blessed to visit and stand on a lot of holy ground. Some of that holy ground is in the various churches I have served. Some of it is at faraway places like Chichen Itza or Castlerig or Stonehenge. Some of it's closer, like in New Mexico, in the Valley of Christ in the desert. And some of it has been standing in my kitchen when my son, who I thought had left, poked his head back in the door to say, "Mommy, I love you." You know, I think holy ground can show up in a lot of ways in our lives. And I want to begin our conversation about Admat Kodesh, or holy ground, this morning by reading a bit from a commentary by Rabbi Gary Creditor, who writes that the phrase Admat Kodesh, or holy ground, is used only once in the entire Torah, in Exodus 3:5, when Moses discovers God's presence at the bush that is not consumed, at a place that will become known as Mount Sinai. It's also called Mount Horeb and Har Har, the mountain. And it is done with no further appellation. Yet this place is never sanctified in Jewish tradition. Instead, we took the experience of Sinai and made that holy, and did not try to find and sanctify the place where Moses stood. Interesting, huh? You know, we talked last week about Jacob's experience with the ladder to heaven that he saw in a dream, and that spot at Bethel was turned into a shrine. And the week before, we talked about Abram's experience with the beings, angels, God at Mamre, and that spot was turned into a shrine. Major archaeological area today. And yet this one wasn't. This one was not. And I think that's interesting because I think it insinuates that holy ground can have a lot wider definition than a spot. And so that is the container that I want to create for us today as we talk about what holy ground is and where we might be standing on holy ground in our lives and in our midst. So let's begin with Exodus 3. Now, to set this up, you know the story, probably not from reading Exodus, but from watching Cecil B. DeMille, that you may have read Exodus, that Moses had quite a beginning to his life. He was placed in a basket and found by Pharaoh's daughter and brought into Pharaoh's family. And later on, he was, he became very powerful. Became probably a priest in Egyptian tradition, and certainly studied and had the schooling of Egyptian royalty. And then something started nagging at him, and he went in search of his identity. Have any of us in this room ever had nagging things going on about our identities? I'd suspect that's about everybody. And he had this nagging thing that went on and discovered that he was Israelite. And so he ended up one of the people who was a slave that was working on, it's the way Cecil B. DeMille puts it, was working on one of the pyramids, was going to die because the structure was being pulled over, and Moses killed the overseer because he would not stop the process. Greed and productivity over human lives. That's not terribly new either. And so Moses killed him. He was brought before the authorities and banished. And so he goes out into the desert and journeys for a long time, and he ends up in Midian, which, if you look on a map, Egypt is here, Midian is quite a ways over here. So he ends up over here. And when we find him today, he's doing okay. After all this trauma. He's keeping he's married now. He's keeping the flocks of his father-in-law. Seems to have made a new life for himself. And that's all just about ready to get turned on its ear. And that's where we meet him in this scripture reading today. Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, a priest of Midian. He led his flock beyond the wilderness and came to Mount Horeb, the mountain of God. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. He looked, and the bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. Then Moses said, I must turn aside and look at this great sight and see why the bush is not burned up. And when the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, he called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Now, this particular telling fits in a particular genre that is part of the happenings of the Hebrew Bible. We dealt with one version of it last week when Jacob sees the ladder to heaven in his dream. And this week, God is going to get more intimate with Moses in this story. These stories are called theophanies. And in a theophany, it's like the way God shows up. And sometimes these theophanies in the Hebrew Bible are very, very dramatic. There's one where the prophet Ezekiel sees all kinds of wheels spinning in the air that latter-day people have decided are UFOs and that sort of thing. And he sees angels, not the pretty cherubs with wings that we're used to in the artwork, but they're covered with eyes and pretty intense looking. And so you have these really, the traditional theophanies are often very intense. And this story has got to be intense for Moses. I want to look at some of the things in detail that happen here. First of all, there's an angel. Now it's interesting. The angel is here, but the angel doesn't say anything. Do you notice that? It's just like present. Angels can be loquacious in the scriptures, and that's not the case in this story. The angel is just there. So we have an angel, we have flame. Does that remind anyone of Pentecost? It should, because flame is something that is associated with the presence of God. The bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. What in the world is that about? That's just, again, in theophanies and in a lot of these scriptures, we are talking about things we cannot explain, which points to our struggle to find the words, which is the theme of our current set of conversations. You know, like Dr. Will Gaffney says, we're hitting a nail with the butt end of a hammer here, or a butt end of a screwdriver. Sorry, we don't have a hammer, and so it's hard to tell exactly what's going on here. People are trying to describe things that they don't understand. So what we get here is a bush that is not consumed. Here's the cool part. Moses said, I got to go see what's going on here. Got to take a closer look. You see how God has gotten his attention? That's what's happening here. God has put on a big show to get Moses' attention. Sometimes God puts on a big show to get our attention, and sometimes God doesn't. It's real subtle. So I want to, as we reclaim this idea of a theophany today, suggest to you that theophanies can happen in burning bushes or on the holy ground of the valley of Christ in the desert, and they can also happen in front of the dishwasher. They can also happen in the conversations we have in Bible study or in worship or in our reflection time. I want to widen that definition of theophany out to sort of encompass Rabbi Gary Creditor's reflection about what holy ground is. So theophanies can be little and hard to see, or they can be traditional like these and be, oh my gosh, I'm having trouble finding the words, so I'm talking about bushes that are not consumed by fire. So sit with that, because you may be having a theophany in your life and not know it. I love that God knows Moses by name here. Moses, Moses, he calls out to him. Anytime in the scriptures you have God knowing somebody by name, or you have God changing a name, something important is happening identity-wise. Moses' old identity is going to be pushed into the background, and he's going to be called into something new, which this is also another thing that shows up a lot in the Hebrew Bible with important people. This is a calling. It's a calling to ministry, a calling to be a transformer in the world. And I hope you notice how dangerous this task is that God is going to call Moses into. God said, come no closer, remove the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is Admat Kodesh, holy ground. He said further, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. I want you to notice here, not only does God know Moses' name, God identifies himself, their selves, herself here. God says, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And God's gonna go one further here in a minute. We're gonna talk about that as far as identities go. I think I'd be hiding my face too, honestly. It sounds like a pretty scary experience. I love one of the professors that I listened to in preparation for my sermon this morning, Dr. Justin Sledge, talks about how in the Hebrew Bible, to be full of awe is a bad thing. It becomes awful. But to be full of some awe, or to have some awe, becomes awesome. So I think which I thought was clever. And it's interesting because God can be pretty overwhelming in these theophanies. And so Moses hides his face. You know, in other theophanies, in the book of Exodus, for example, you have God who is hidden on Mount Sinai around, this is around the time of the giving of the Decalogue or the Ten Commandments, that God is sort of hidden in this, the word is translated gloom or darkness, sort of hidden back there. And you have stories in the Hebrew Bible of hair turning white, beards turning white when people encounter God. So these theophanies can be pretty scary. But it's my hope for us today that we can find ways to get just enough that we experience God's awesomeness instead of the overwhelm. So, second reading, the Lord said, I have observed, and this is Yahweh, YHVH, the Lord. If you want to hear a funny story about how that became Jehovah, please listen to last week's Bible study lecture. I won't give away the story, but I invite you into that. Yahweh and Jehovah, two different terms for God. Then the Lord said, I've observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings. Listen to the verbs. I've seen, I've observed, I've heard their cry. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land to a good and spacious land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the country of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. The cry of the Israelites has now come to me. I've also seen how the Egyptians oppress them. Now, one of the things that's really problematic about this is for us to notice, and this is problematic with the whole Exodus story, is that there are already people in the land of milk and honey. So are the Israelites going to be displacing these people? So you have land tensions, and there's a wonderful essay by Dr. Robert Warrior that talks about that from a Native American's perspective in the United States and from his social location as a Native American, and hearing that all of these peoples are going to be displaced. So I'll throw that out for you. That certainly deserves another sermon or two, but about the challenges of the Exodus. And our professor in Bible study also touches on this in the last lecture, which I was delighted to find out coincided with what I was planning to do today with this. So if you want to go back and get more, please, I will be sending I've got some work to do to get the link updated, but I'm going to be sending that out so you can all view it. The cry of the Israelites has now come to me. I've also seen how the Egyptians oppress them. Now go, I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. And then I love this. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Who am I? Notice he said earlier, here I am, which is the right answer when God calls out to us, right? Not going and hiding under the bed or not avoiding your ministry call for several years. Yeah, that would be me. But saying, here I am. Here I am. And sometimes it takes some work for us to get there. But now he says, who am I to go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you, and this shall be a sign for you that it is I who sent you. When you brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. But Moses said to God, if I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. I want you to look at that. That's like, that's the ultimate present moment statement. I am, I am that I am. It's also past and future. It kind of covers all of it. I am, I am that I am. And I also want you to notice that, we just did a series last spring on the book of John. And all the times in the Gospel of John that Jesus says, I am the sheep gate, I am the vine and the branches, I am the resurrection and the life. This is what he's riffing on there. Do you see that? And so this whole idea that Jesus is using these symbols that are embodied in everyday common symbols to talk about who he is, which brings the theophany down to earth. Do you see that? Fully divine, fully human, embodied God. He's bringing the I am theophany that can be kind of awful down into the present with common everyday symbolism. How beautiful is that? I hope you'll go back and listen to some of those things with that piece of information in mind when you think about the incredible things that Jewish Jesus was doing as he interpreted the scriptures he was familiar with, these scriptures and these stories. And I hope that you'll take that with you as you go. Okay, I'm going to wind us up and let you talk about this a little bit. I want to finish with this word from Margaret Silf one more time. You've heard it twice before, and I'm going to do it one more time. We stand before a burning bush whenever other human beings share with us something of their relationship with God or something of the movements of their hearts. In such moments, may we always realize that we are standing on Admat Kodesh, on holy ground. Where are you standing on holy ground today? Where is the holy showing up for you? Maybe in ways that are hard to see and are hard or unexpected